After 22 years of raising my son alone, he handed me an envelope containing a DNA test that read, "You're not my biological father." The real father was my ex-wife's husband, so I destroyed both their lives. Hey Reddit, strap in, because what I'm about to tell you is going to mess with your head. I'd been living a lie for 22 years, and the day I found out, it nuked everything I thought I knew. But I made sure my ex-wife got exactly what she earned. Name's Garrett, 49 male. It's a bit long and complicated, so bear with me till the end. My sister Tess spotted it before I did. We were sitting in the fifth row at Northwestern's graduation ceremony. 8,000 people packed into Ryan Field under a June sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain, and she elbowed me hard enough to leave a bruise. "Something's off with Caleb," she whispered. I'd been too busy being the proudest idiot in Illinois, grinning so wide my face hurt, snapping photos on my phone like some tourist dad who'd never seen his kid in a cap and gown before. Which technically, I hadn't. Not at this level. Not summa cum laude from one of the top engineering programs in the country. But Tess has this thing. She reads people the way I read blueprints. When she says something's off, you shut up and pay attention. I looked at my son walking with his class, honors cord around his neck, and I saw it immediately. His right hand kept drifting to his jacket pocket, touching something, checking it. 22 years I'd spent learning that kid's body language. I knew when he was worried about an exam because his leg would bounce under any available table. I knew when he'd screwed up at school because he'd suddenly become very interested in his shoelaces. I knew when some girl had stomped on his heart because he'd get quiet in a way that made the house feel empty. Right now, watching him cross that field with 2,000 other graduates, every alarm in my head was going off. I'd flown in from Philadelphia 3 days early for this. Took vacation time from the civil engineering firm where I'd ground out 26 years designing bridges and highway overpasses. Not glamorous work. Nobody writes magazine articles about the guy who makes sure your morning commute doesn't collapse into a river. But it was honest, and it paid enough to get Caleb here. Every overtime shift, every weekend I'd spent hunched over structural calculations instead of doing literally anything fun. All of it was for this moment. My son. First person in our family to get into a school like Northwestern, let alone graduate top of his class from one of the best engineering programs in the country. The ceremony dragged on for nearly 3 hours. When Caleb's name got called, when he walked across that stage to grab his diploma, I stood up and clapped until my hands burned. Tess was crying next to me. I was grinning like a maniac, but Caleb barely smiled, and that hand went right back to his pocket the second he stepped off stage. After the ceremony, families flooded the lawn. I found Caleb near an old oak tree at the edge of the chaos, standing in the shade like he was trying to disappear into the bark. He'd gotten tall, taller than me since he was 16. Same dark hair I used to have before stress turned it gray. Same stubborn jaw that showed up in old photos of my grandfather. I pulled him into a hug and told him I was proud. He held on way too long, way too tight. When we separated, his hands were shaking. Tess swooped in to take pictures, chattering about dinner reservations and our Costa Rica trip, buying him time to pull himself together. That's my sister, always running interference without being asked. I made the mistake of asking if his mother was coming. Caleb's face did something complicated. Sabrina and I had divorced when he was 2. She'd remarried a corporate attorney named Mike about a year later, relocated to Phoenix, and essentially ghosted her own son. Birthday cards when her assistant remembered. Holiday calls that lasted maybe 4 minutes before she had to run. She'd shown up to 3 of his school events in 22 years. 3. Caleb said she was in Zurich with Mike, some international arbitration conference. Sent congratulations via text that morning. Of course she did. His voice dropped to almost nothing when he asked if we could talk somewhere private. Just us. Said it couldn't wait. His hand was in that pocket again, white-knuckling whatever was in there. The coffee shop was a 15-minute walk from campus, one of those places with exposed brick and mismatched furniture where grad students come to have breakdowns over overpriced lattes. Empty enough that nobody would overhear us. The barista was more interested in her phone than in 2 guys having what was clearly a serious conversation in the corner booth. Caleb sat across from me, hands flat on the table, fingers interlaced, knuckles pale. I ordered coffee. He ordered nothing, just sat there staring at the table. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out what he'd been guarding all day. Manila envelope. Thick. Official. Laboratory logo in the corner. Bio-verified diagnostics. Under that, the words that were about to flip my whole world upside down. DNA paternity analysis. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. Every worst-case scenario ran through my head in high definition. Cancer genes. Huntington's. Some hereditary nightmare that would explain why he looked like he'd been hauling around a secret for years. He pushed the envelope across the table. His hand was shaking. I opened it. The first page hit me like a truck, then kept hitting. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. I read it 6 times. The words refused to change. 0%. Dad. Caleb's voice cracked like he was 13 again. I found out 3 years ago. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you ever since. 3 years. He'd been carrying this for 3 years. Through his junior and senior years of college. Through finals and internships and graduation planning. While I was bragging to everyone who'd listen about my brilliant son at Northwestern. The story came out in pieces, like he had to force each one through a wall of guilt and fear. Junior year. Required biology gen ed that all engineering students had to complete. Something about making sure technical graduates understood basic life sciences. The professor had designed a DNA analysis project where students got samples from their parents for comparison testing, demonstrating inheritance patterns and genetic markers. Most kids used fresh samples. Had their parents spit into tubes over Christmas break? Caleb had used an old cheek swab I'd given him for a middle school science fair project, something I'd kept in a cardboard box with all his school stuff, report cards, art projects, that clay handprint from first grade that looks nothing like a hand. The genetics lab results came back showing 0 markers in common between us. Not low probability. Caleb thought it had to be a lab error, sample contamination, equipment malfunction, something with a logical explanation that didn't involve his entire identity being a lie. So he bought one of those Ancestry DNA kits online, the kind you see advertised during football games. Spit in the tube, mail it back, find out you're 3% Viking or whatever. He compared his results to mine from when I'd done the same test a few years back, curious about whether the family stories about Italian ancestry were real. Same result. No relation, different haplogroups, no shared genetic heritage at all. But the confirmation that sealed it, the one that made denial impossible, came last year. Minor shoulder surgery after a pickup basketball injury that went wrong. Routine procedure, but the hospital did standard blood work including typing. His came back as B negative, rare type. About 2% of the population. I'm O positive. His mother is A positive. The nurse didn't accuse anyone of anything. She just said the chart didn't make sense and recommended he verify family medical history when he got a chance. Caleb nodded along, already knowing exactly what it meant. For those who don't remember anything from high school biology, blood type is determined by inherited alleles. An O parent can only pass O alleles. An A parent can pass A or O. Neither of them can pass B. It's genetically impossible for 2 parents with O and A blood types to produce a child with B-type blood. The Punnett squares don't lie. 3 independent confirmations. University Genetics Lab, commercial ancestry DNA, hospital blood typing. All pointing to the same conclusion that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. My phone buzzed. Text from Tess. Parked by the east lot. No rush. I moved dinner and extended the hotel. Whatever you need. I stared at my coffee. It had gone cold. The barista was still looking at her phone. Who? My voice came out like gravel. Who's the biological father? Caleb looked at me with eyes that had been carrying this weight for 1,000 days. Mike, Mom's husband. The room tilted about 30 degrees to the left and stayed there. I confronted her last Christmas, Caleb said. Flew out without telling you. She broke down and admitted everything. The affair had started nearly 4 years before Sabrina and I separated. She met Mike at a legal conference in Chicago and started sleeping with him almost immediately. When she got pregnant, she wasn't sure whose it was. But Mike had made crystal clear he didn't want kids. Too focused on making partner. So Sabrina made a calculation. She stayed with me. Let me believe the baby was mine. Let me cry in the delivery room and count his fingers and promise to protect him forever. 2 weeks after Caleb was born, while I was at work, she secretly arranged a paternity test through a lab in another state. When it confirmed Mike was the biological father, she destroyed everything, shredded the documents, deleted the digital trail, buried it. Then she waited. Let me bond completely with Caleb. Let me become his entire world. And when he was 2 years old, she filed for divorce. Didn't fight for custody. Didn't want custody. She wanted to dump the responsibility on me so she could start fresh with Mike without a toddler cramping her style. For 22 years, I'd raised her son while she built her perfect life in a house with a pool in Scottsdale. She offered to pay me off, Caleb said quietly. When I confronted her, said she'd cover grad school, wedding, house down payment. Whatever I wanted, just had to keep my mouth shut. And you told her? No. And that she could keep her money. Tess drove us back to the hotel without asking questions. She'd already handled everything. Extended the room bookings, moved our Costa Rica flights, contacted someone in her paralegal network about attorneys who specialized in this specific kind of mess. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, replaying 22 years of memories through a filter that made everything look like a crime scene. Every bedtime story, every little league game I'd coached, every homework session that went past midnight, every dollar I'd scraped together for his private school tuition after the public school situation got bad. The year he was 9 and broke his arm falling off the monkey bars. I'd carried him to the car, driven to the ER, held his hand while they set the bone. Sabrina had called from Phoenix 3 days later, asking how he was doing. The time he got his first rejection letter from a girl he'd asked to a middle school dance. I'd sat with him on the back porch and told him about every time I'd been shot down, which was plenty. We'd eaten ice cream straight from the carton and talked about how rejection was just redirection. Sabrina sent a card that Christmas with a generic message about growing up so fast. All of it built on a lie. Her lie. But the experiences were real. The bond was real. And I wasn't going to let her retroactively poison every good memory I had with my son. Around midnight, I made 2 calls. First was to Caleb. Told him Costa Rica was still happening. No debate. Then told him something I needed him to understand down to his bones. He was my son. Always had been. Always would be. Biology is just chemistry. Fatherhood is a choice. I'd chosen him every day for 22 years, and I was choosing him again right now. Second call was to my best friend Dom Ricci. We'd been tight since we were 23, working our first real jobs and sharing an apartment that should have been condemned. Dom had spent the last 20 years as a forensic accountant, the guy corporations hire when they suspect someone's been skimming, the human equivalent of a metal detector at a crime scene. I gave him the short version. Dom listened without interrupting. Then he laid down the rules. All right, first thing. No contact with Sabrina or Mike. None. Anything you say when you're angry becomes ammo later. What if she contacts me? Forward it to me. Don't reply. Don't engage. Let her talk to a wall. So what's the play here? Document everything. Every dollar you spent on Caleb. Receipts, bank statements, tuition records. We build a timeline that holds up under scrutiny. And we focus on what's provable. Not emotional damages. Not 22 years of my life. Numbers. Paper trails. Stuff that doesn't lie. Dom had seen enough fraud cases to know how these things worked. The emotional argument might feel satisfying, but it gives the other side too much room to wiggle. Numbers don't exaggerate. Numbers just sit there being correct until someone writes a check. He said he'd fly out after Costa Rica. We'd build the case together. The first message from Sabrina hit my phone at 6 a.m. Caleb told me he finally told you. I know you're upset. Please let me explain before you do anything drastic. This doesn't have to get ugly. I showed it to Tess over breakfast. She read it twice, her expression going flat. She's not apologizing. She's managing you, testing which approach gets a response. What do I do? Nothing. She's used to controlling conversations. Silence will drive her nuts. I didn't respond. Over the next week, while Caleb and I were in Costa Rica, Sabrina's communication attempts followed a pattern that Dom later called the narcissist's playbook. Phase 1. The guilt trip. I was so young and scared. I made mistakes, but everything I did was because I loved Caleb. When that got no reply, Phase 2. The victim flip. Mike is furious. My marriage might be over. Everything I've built is falling apart. When that failed, Phase 3. Recruiting flying monkeys. Caleb got texts from relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, urging him to hear his mother's side before it's too late. She even reached out to Tess directly, woman to woman, asking her to help Garrett see reason before this destroys the family. Tess's response was beautiful. She screenshot everything and forwarded it to Dom without sending a single reply. Documentation. Pattern establishment. Every manipulation attempt became evidence of exactly who Sabrina was. The silence was clearly working. By day 4, Sabrina's messages were getting increasingly unhinged. She tried calling from blocked numbers, tried reaching Caleb through his college friends, even attempted to contact my boss at the engineering firm, claiming there was a family emergency, and she desperately needed to reach me. My boss, who'd met Sabrina exactly once at a company picnic 12 years ago, and described her afterward as the kind of woman who counts the shrimp, told her I was on vacation and hung up. Dom was keeping a running tally, 17 contact attempts in 7 days, each one documented, each one adding to the picture of someone who cared more about controlling the story than owning what she'd done. Costa Rica was exactly what we needed. 7 days of jungle and ocean and deliberately not thinking about anything heavier than whether to order the fish tacos or the ceviche. We zip-lined through cloud forests where the trees had been growing since before Columbus got lost looking for India. The guides strapped us into harnesses that looked like they'd been tested on maybe 3 people ever, clipped us to cables stretched between platforms 100 feet up, and shoved us into the canopy. I screamed like a kid. Caleb laughed so hard he almost choked on a bug. We tried surfing waves that were way above my skill level. The instructor, a kid named Marco, who couldn't have been older than 19, watched me get demolished by my fourth wave and very diplomatically suggested maybe I should start with something more gentle, yeah? I ate sand twice. Got water up my nose 3 times. Almost drowned once when I got caught in a washing machine of white water and forgot which way was up. Best afternoon I'd had in years. We hiked to waterfalls that crashed into swimming holes so perfect they looked like movie sets. The trails wound through jungle so dense you couldn't see the sky, past spider monkeys that screamed at us like we'd personally insulted their ancestors, through clouds of butterflies that landed on our shoulders. The resort had these open-air restaurants where geckos would run across the rafters during dinner, and birds would hop around looking for dropped rice. Caleb tried to photograph every single one like he was putting together a wildlife catalog. The first 3 days we kept it light by unspoken agreement. His new job at an aerospace company in San Diego, designing components for satellite propulsion systems. The apartment he'd found that he described as cozy, which I knew meant approximately the size of a walk-in closet. The girl he'd been seeing for almost a year now, Mira, who worked in the same building and apparently gave him a hard time about his coffee order every single morning. Tess texted every morning with updates. 2 more contact attempts from Sabrina, blocked. 1 attempt through a cousin Caleb hadn't seen since he was 12, documented and ignored. Dom was making progress on the financial reconstruction. The timeline was coming together. We watched sunsets that turned the Pacific into a light show. Slept too late. Let the silence between conversations just be silence, instead of something that needed filling. But on our last night, sitting on a beach with the stars coming out, Caleb finally gave me the complete picture of what Sabrina had actually done. The affair with Mike lasted 14 months before she got pregnant. Not a moment of weakness. Not a one-time mistake. A deliberate, ongoing betrayal with someone she planned to eventually be with. The business trips that were hotel rooms. The late nights at the office that were lies. The phone calls she'd taken other rooms with doors closed. When the pregnancy test came back positive, she did the math. Mike didn't want kids. I desperately did. I'd been talking about starting a family since we got engaged. So she made her move. Stayed with me through the pregnancy. The secret paternity test 2 weeks after Caleb was born was her insurance policy. She used a lab in a different state. And when it confirmed Mike was the biological father, she chose to destroy the evidence and wait. She waited for me to bond so completely with Caleb that walking away would be unthinkable. Waited for me to restructure my entire life around being his father. When Caleb was 2, she pulled the trigger. "There's one more thing," Caleb said, staring at the waves. When I confronted her at Christmas, she tried a different angle after the bribe didn't work. What angle? She told me you couldn't handle finding out, that you were fragile, that it would probably wreck you and it'd be my fault. He looked at me. She tried to make me feel like protecting you meant lying to you forever. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That's not protection," I said. "That's control." "Yeah, that's why I told you anyway." Dom called it the war room. Really, it was his basement in Philly, converted years ago into a home office that looked like the set of a conspiracy thriller. Whiteboards covered in timelines, corkboards with pinned documents connected by red string that I was pretty sure was a joke, but also maybe wasn't. He'd worked the entire week I was in Costa Rica, barely slept, from the look of the coffee cups stacked near his computer. Bank records going back 20 years, dug up from archives and old account statements I'd kept in file boxes. Every tuition check I'd written to Caleb's private school after the bullying situation at Jefferson Middle got bad enough that he'd started faking stomach aches to avoid going. 4 years of that until we figured out what was happening. Then I'd pulled him and enrolled him at St. Augustine's, which cost nearly $18,000 a year, but had actual supervision and actual consequences for kids who made other kids' lives miserable. The $529 college savings account I'd funded completely alone since the day Caleb was born. Every monthly deposit documented with timestamps and amounts. I'd set up automatic transfers the week we brought him home from the hospital. Never missed a payment. Never touched the money for anything else even when I probably should have. 4 years of Northwestern tuition at $58,000 per year. Room and board on top of that. Books, lab fees. That laptop he'd needed sophomore year when his old one finally died. Every invoice printed and filed. Medical expenses going back to infancy. Well, child visits and vaccinations and that broken arm when he was 9. The shoulder surgery last year. Orthodontist bills from middle school when he needed braces, and I'd had to set up a payment plan because the insurance covered roughly none of it. Summer camps. Little league registration fees. SAT prep courses that cost more than my first car. Dom had created spreadsheets breaking it all down. Annual totals. Category totals. Running totals. He'd even calculated opportunity cost. What I would have earned if I'd invested that money instead of spending it on raising a child who wasn't biologically mine. The documented total came to $412,000. That's just what you can prove easily, Dom said, flipping through one of several binders he'd created. Doesn't include opportunity cost. Doesn't include the raises you turned down because they required travel, and you couldn't leave Caleb alone. Doesn't include the house you didn't buy because school district mattered more than square footage. Doesn't include 22 years of your life. So what's the move? I asked. Sue her for $500,000 I'll never see? Nope. Dom pulled up something on his laptop. The move is leverage. I've been looking into Mike's firm, Whitmore and Associates. High-end corporate litigation. Fortune 500 clients who hire them specifically because they need representation that looks squeaky clean. And their whole business model depends on appearing trustworthy. Their clients are risk-averse corporations who can't afford to be connected to anything that might become a headline or show up when someone's digging for dirt. A senior partner who fathered a kid during a long-term affair and let another man raise that kid for over 2 decades while paying nothing? That's not just embarrassing. That's the kind of thing opposing counsel brings up when they want to show patterns of dishonesty. I started to see where this was going. We're not trying to win in court, Dom continued. We're trying to make court look so awful for them that they'll do almost anything to avoid it. Dom ran the numbers and built the timeline. A lawyer friend of his drafted the actual demand language, so everything stayed clean and legally sound. Tess had been busy too. She'd driven to my parents' old house in Jersey, now owned by our cousin, and spent a weekend digging through boxes in the basement. What she found was gold. Letters Sabrina had written before the divorce, talking about feeling trapped and needing more. Birthday cards she'd sent Caleb over the years. The postmarks proving how rarely they'd actually arrived on time. Christmas presents still in original shipping boxes because she'd had them delivered to my address instead of bringing them herself. And the best part, a letter she'd written me during divorce proceedings, filled with language about always putting Caleb first and never wanting to hurt anyone. Every word of it directly contradicted what she'd actually done. Here's what we ask for, Dom said, laying out the strategy. Reimbursement of $300,000 for documented expenses. Establishment of a $150,000 irrevocable trust for Caleb and any future grandchildren, administered by an independent trustee they can't influence. And a written acknowledgement of the basic facts. They'll never put anything in writing. They will when they see the alternative. Everything we've documented becomes public record the second we file. Every partner at Mike's firm sees it. Every client. Every competitor who might want to use it against them in future cases. What if they call the bluff? Dom smiled. Then it's not a bluff. We flew to Phoenix 3 weeks after I got back from Costa Rica. Me, Dom, and Tess. United front. The flight was quiet. I spent most of it staring out the window at clouds. Dom reviewed his notes. Tess read a mystery novel with the kind of focus that meant she was actually thinking about something else entirely. Dom had arranged the meeting through channels. A formal letter sent to Mike's office, CC'd to Whitmore and Associates General Counsel, requesting a private discussion regarding a family matter that may have professional implications. Corporate speak for, we have something that could embarrass you badly, and we'd like to talk before it becomes everyone's problem. They'd agreed to meet at a mediation office in downtown Scottsdale. Neutral territory. Professional setting. Sabrina and Mike were already there when we arrived, sitting on one side of the table with their own attorney, a silver-haired guy who probably charged more per hour than I made in a day. Sabrina was wearing something designer. Mike was in a suit that screamed senior partner. Their attorney had a legal pad and a pen, and the look of someone who'd been told just enough to be worried, but not enough to know how bad this could get. Thanks for agreeing to meet, Dom said, taking a seat across from them. He slid a folder across the polished wood. Before we get started, you should probably look through this. Inside was every documented dollar I'd spent raising their biological son over 22 years. $412,000 total. Their attorney started flipping through pages. His face changed as he got deeper into the stack. The room got very quiet. Here's the situation, I said. My voice came out flatter than I'd planned, colder. I spent 22 years raising your son while you two built your life in Scottsdale. I didn't know he wasn't biologically mine. At least one of you did. Now we're going to fix that. Sabrina started to cry. Garrett, please. I was so young. I made terrible mistakes. But everything I did, I'm gonna stop you right there. My voice came out dead. You didn't make a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. You ran a 22-year con. You got a secret paternity test. You destroyed the evidence. You timed your divorce specifically, so I'd be too attached to walk away. You used me as free childcare while you built your life with the guy you actually wanted. That's not... I'm not done. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots Tess had collected. Every guilt trip message she'd sent since graduation. Every pressure campaign through relatives. Every attempt to manipulate Caleb into keeping her secret. This is who you are. This is documented. And this is what everyone's gonna see if we go to court. Mike finally spoke up. Lawyer voice. What do you want exactly? Reimbursement of $300,000 for documented child-rearing expenses. Establishment of a $150,000 irrevocable trust for Caleb and any future grandchildren. Written acknowledgement of the facts. Sabrina's mask slipped. You can't be serious. Option A, you write the check and sign the papers. Option B, I file a civil suit for fraud and unjust enrichment. Everything becomes public record. Every document we've put together goes through discovery. Every partner at Whitmore & Associates finds out that one of their senior attorneys fathered a kid during an affair and let another man foot the bill for 2 decades. I looked at Mike. I looked into the firm's client list. Patterson Industries alone is worth what? 8 figures a year? Think they want their corporate counsel tied to this kind of story? Think your partners want to explain it to their other clients? Mike's face had turned red. This is extortion. Dom spoke for the first time since laying down the folder. His voice was calm. Extortion requires threatening something illegal. We're not doing that. We're describing what happens naturally when your choices become visible to people who care about your character. If you'd rather see how a jury reacts to the full story, we're ready for that too. They asked for a week to think it over. I gave them 5 days. Day 2, Sabrina tried one more manipulation play. She called Tess, sobbing, saying I was destroying her life, that Mike might leave her, that everything she'd worked for was crumbling. Tried to get Tess to talk some sense into me. Tess let her talk for about 30 seconds. Then she said, you wrecked your family 22 years ago when you lied to my brother. You're just now getting the bill. And hung up. Day 4, their attorney called Dom with a counteroffer. $200,000 reimbursement, $100,000 trust, acknowledgement with confidentiality clauses. We countered. Original terms. Non-negotiable. But we'd agree to keep the acknowledgement sealed unless they broke the deal. Day 5, they accepted. The wire transfer cleared in 3 weeks. $300,000 to an account Dom had helped me set up for exactly this. The trust documents were signed and locked down, administered by an independent trustee in Denver who had no connection to either family and couldn't be swayed by anyone's tears or threats. The acknowledgement sat in my safe deposit box like a loaded gun I hoped I'd never have to use. But the money wasn't the real win. It was never about the money. Over the following months, I watched Sabrina's carefully built world start to crack. Not from anything I did directly, just from the truth quietly spreading. Caleb had told a few close friends the real story. The friends he'd trusted with the secret for 3 years, plus a few more after everything got settled. Those friends mentioned it to other friends. Someone's mom mentioned it to someone else's mom at a charity luncheon. A partner's wife heard a version at a book club. The details got fuzzy in the retelling, but the core stayed the same. Senior attorney fathered a child, let another man raise him, paid nothing for 22 years. Mike's firm started having some unusual turnover. Junior associates who'd heard whispers and decided they'd rather build their careers somewhere that didn't have that kind of baggage. A mid-level partner who'd been thinking about leaving finally made the jump, citing cultural concerns. The charity boards where Sabrina had spent years building her image began finding reasons to rotate leadership opportunities. Her committee chair position quietly became a committee member position. Then, her name started disappearing from event programs entirely. The social invitations that had filled her calendar showed up less often, then barely at all. Nobody canceled her. People just stopped returning calls, stopped including her in group texts about upcoming events, stopped saving her a seat at the good tables. In Scottsdale's social circles, reputation is currency, and Sabrina's account had just gone negative. Nobody sued them. Nobody had to. Reputation damage doesn't need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs the right people knowing the right things and making their own quiet decisions about who they want to be around. Mike wasn't fired from Whitmore and Associates. Instead, his corner office became a regular office during a space optimization initiative. His major accounts got moved to rising partners, who needed the experience. His name quietly disappeared from the firm's leadership page. When the annual partner retreat happened, his invitation got lost in the shuffle. In the status-obsessed world of high-end corporate law, that kind of slow-motion demotion was almost worse than getting canned. Getting fired is an event. You can spin it, rebrand, move on. But death by 1,000 paper cuts, the gradual erosion of everything you'd built, that's the kind of humiliation that sticks. 8 months after Phoenix, Caleb called to tell me he was engaged. Mira, the aerospace engineer. He invited me, then he asked about inviting Sabrina and Mike. I told him that was his call. But I had one condition. If they came as regular guests. Back row, no speeches, no special acknowledgement, no roles whatsoever. Caleb agreed. The wedding was in Sedona, small venue tucked into the Red Rocks about 20 minutes outside town, maybe 50 people total. Late afternoon light made everything glow like a postcard. Red sandstone formations rising behind the venue like giant walls. Clear blue sky. Sabrina and Mike arrived in a rental car that was nicer than most people's regular cars. They got out looking like they'd rather be getting root canals. I watched them cross the parking area from where I was standing near the ceremony site. Sabrina's posture was perfect. Her smile was practiced, but her eyes were scanning the crowd like she was looking for emergency exits. Tess had assigned herself boundary patrol. She'd positioned herself near the entrance, intercepting Sabrina the moment she tried to approach Caleb before the ceremony. Sabrina, glad you could make it. Let me show you to your seats. Friendly smile. Light touch on the elbow. Redirect to the seating area before Sabrina could even think of a response. When Sabrina tried again 15 minutes later, angling toward where Caleb was taking photos with Mira's family, Tess showed up out of nowhere with a comment about the beautiful flower arrangements and a firm escort to the back row where seats had been reserved with their names on little place cards. Back row. Edge seats. Clear view of the ceremony, but maximum distance from anyone who actually mattered. Dom handled Mike, pulling him into the kind of conversations that go nowhere, but take forever. Arizona real estate prices. Traffic around Phoenix. The challenges of building in desert climates. Just a friendly fellow guest making small talk. Impossible to walk away from without looking rude. They sat in their assigned seats during the vows, watched from the edges during the reception hour. Got no photos with Caleb and Mira. No acknowledgement from the officiant. No toast invitations. No spot in the family shots that would end up framed on mantles and shelves. They were spectators at their biological son's wedding, background figures in someone else's story. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. I stood at the front as Caleb's chosen father. Tess sat in the family section with her kids. Dom was among the honored guests. And Sabrina, who had spent 22 years treating her own son like an inconvenience to be managed and handed off, sat in the back, watching the family she'd thrown away function perfectly without her. She made one attempt near the end of the reception to pull Caleb aside, waited for a moment when Mira had stepped away, then started moving toward him. Tess showed up before Sabrina got within 15 feet. Hey Caleb, Mira's grandmother wants to get a photo with you two before she has to leave. And just like that, he was gone, guided across the venue with a hand on his shoulder while Sabrina stood alone by the dessert table, watching her son walk away from her. Her face in that moment was something I'll remember forever. I celebrated with my son, stood beside him while he waited for Mira, handed him the rings when the moment came. After the reception, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a completed adult adoption petition. He was 23 now, old enough to make his own legal decisions. I want to make it official, he said. Change my name. Make the paperwork match what's been true my whole life. I signed without hesitation. The adoption finalized 2 months later. Caleb Brennan. My name. My son. Legal and permanent. Sabrina asked for a meeting after the paperwork went through. Email full of talk about rebuilding and moving forward and putting the past behind us. Caleb read it and said no. Dom still comes over for dinner once a month. Tess calls every Sunday without fail. Her kids are getting big. Life keeps moving. Caleb and Mira announced last month that they're expecting a boy, due in February. Last I heard, Sabrina and Mike are working through some challenges. The house in Scottsdale is on the market. The social calendar is empty. I've got my son, my grandson on the way. A family that chose each other when it actually counted. Turns out that's worth more than anything biology could give you. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.